Alrighty, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Barbell Nerds podcast. My name is Sean with my co-host Will Rattel. We are happy to welcome Cam Davidson of Penn State. Cam, thanks for joining us, man.
Sure, guys. Appreciate it. This is awesome.
Excited to have you on.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, dude. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about Cam Davidson's history? I know you have a fluorescent history growing up in the strength and conditioning world, all the way from out west to out east. So give everybody a nice little intro.
Sure. Kind of got my start at Wyoming, where I helped intern for those coaches after I got done wrestling. It just was a way for me to, stay in it, and really didn't know I wanted to be a strength coach at that point. But just my strength coaches there were such good people and just great coaches that coming up under people like that, it just motivated me to want to do it. And it's like, man, it would be really fun, whether it was 5 a.m. or 8 at night. It was like, I kind of want to do this. They made it seem so fun. And for me, it was just never really a second thought once I got into it. So that's where I got my start, under some really good coaches there. Then had a chance to do my grad work at Marshall. So basically just had an interview, and then 2 days later got hired and packed a truck and drove across country. I didn't even know Marshall was in West Virginia at the time. Being at Wyoming and Colorado my whole life, I was like, okay, I got to pack my truck. Where am I going? So that was a pretty fun adventure. And so
was there Google Maps all the way back then, or was that a map, or is that a MapQuest thing?
That was a map with a highlighter where I'm going to go. Shit. Man, I got to go through all these states. Oh my goodness. But yeah, it was before all that. I think I was trying to ask somebody to borrow their Garmin, and I would ship it back to them. They said no. So that was pretty fun, but spent about a year at Marshall for grad school, then went down. I worked with John Sanderson there, and some other really good strength coaches. I know you just talked to one, Daniel Roos. He and I had a lot of fun at Marshall, man. I know he talked a little bit about that on that podcast, but boy, that was a fun year, and I could talk to you for 5 hours just about that year. But that was with John Sanderson, and John got the basketball job at Clemson, and it was just good timing. Asked me to go down there with him to be his assistant. I was there for 10 months where we did men's and women's basketball, and I did swimming and diving there as well. Found out that I wasn't very good at training swimming and diving at that point, so that was a big learning curve. 75 kids by myself in one group. That was interesting. And then just got really – it was almost like – right place, right time, kind of met the right people, and was fortunate enough to get that head job at College of Charleston in 2007. Was there for 2 years. And that's where I met my wife. She was an assistant volleyball coach there. And, she had an opportunity. She played volleyball at Penn State, and she had an opportunity to come back up here and coach. And I came and followed her. So I went from a pretty fast ascent to a director position, very luckily and fortunate, but went ahead and took that leap of faith and came to Penn State with her and became a volunteer for a while. And just from there, it's now year 12, and things have worked out. And right now, just working with women's volleyball and men's hockey.
Yeah, dude, yeah. That growth. Go ahead, Will. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, we can probably get into what you're doing with hockey a little bit, because we haven't talked to anybody that's worked with hockey yet on this podcast. And we've talked with guys who work with wrestling, who work with football, who work with basketball, but we haven't talked with anybody who works with hockey. So, and with your background, you said you work with swimming and diving, volleyball, a bunch of other sports too. What do you do differently? Just tell us what your experience is like with hockey on a day-to-day basis, how you program with them, what kind of habits you see them have, if there's any patterns or injury risk that you see with them, just what your experience is like with them.
And I know we talked the last night a little bit. I want to know kind of how your philosophies, your principles have shifted as well, because you said you've been with hockey for what, 5-6 years now?
This is year 9.
With hockey?
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap, that went fast.
It was fast, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, how has that
year
evolved?
8? Maybe year 8.
Okay.
Well, it was funny because you know how we were talking yesterday, and I was like, I did a pretty fun exercise today. I just looked at my day. I just out of the blue, I'm just sitting there wondering how this plan comes together. You know, we write these plans, and I just like to chicken scratch it on paper before I ever put it onto Team Builder or something. And I'm looking at it going, I just was curious about how many people influenced me to write this program. So actually this morning, I just went the full thing for it. So I wrote this Sunday night, right? And I was like, I wonder how many people have influenced my decisions to write this particular 2-week program. And it was 17 coaches.
Wow.
17 strength coaches went in to me writing a 2-week block. Is that nuts?
That's super cool.
That's
that shows you the fraternity that is strength and conditioning, and how good of people coaches can truly be.
It's absolutely crazy. And I'm sitting there going, you know, that's odd, because everybody likes to say like, hey, like I steal 90% of it and maybe 10% is mine. It's absolutely true. Like the only thing I did was take the pieces and put it together. You know, it's like, I didn't come up with any of this stuff. You know, it's like, but no, it was really cool to do that. And so the reason why I'm starting with that is just because of what shaped my philosophy. And through maybe 8 years of hockey now, it's like when I first started hockey, you kind of take that previous experience with other sports that work. You know, I was a wrestler that got into the business working basketball. And then, you know, I just kind of found my niche into volleyball, and now kind of into track and field with the throwers here for a while. And now hockey's a big part of that. And it's just funny how different people influences your decisions every cycle, every year, let alone just your experiences with the team and the things that you fail at, or you feel like things work well. And what I found out really early on was the programs that I used from my past experiences for hockey were not good. What worked really well for volleyball and for throwers, it just really wasn't fitting well with hockey. Neither was my hair. I'm not sure I'd ever have long hair if I didn't have hockey, but you know, and the mustache was my wife giving me crap about my beard. She goes, "You should shave your beard." And I was like, okay. So I came downstairs.
Just leave it.
What the hell is that? And I said, well, it's not a beard.
Yeah.
You know, just kind of giving my wife some crap. But so going from there, it was a, you know, I took over a hockey team 2 weeks prior to that first season. And so, you know, I was the interim guy. The strength coach got let go with some weird circumstances. And I was just interim, you know. Fitz was here at the time, and he goes, "Cam, are you interested?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." So he went ahead and let me lead that. But as I was the guy going into season, it was, you know, Coach Skadowski said, "Listen, we just lost our guy, and this was our plan. Can you do this plan so we don't have to drastically change anything?" And I said, "Absolutely." But I was writing these programs that, you know, I wasn't fully aware of anything going on in hockey. What were practices like? What are games like? What's travel like? What are the guys like? I knew nothing. So I took that past experiences and just tried to shove this program that had worked with other sports into hockey. And it just, you know, it didn't work well. And so every single year, you know, just researching hockey. And I will say this, there's a lot of good strength coaches out there in this business, but right now in my experiences, hockey strength coaches are some of the best in terms of guys that just really understand the sport, the movement of the sport. That skating stride is incredibly different from anything else. And they're all really good people willing to share. So a lot of this, you know, credit to all those guys that have been willing to help me out, which has been huge. But so I guess getting into more specifically, what really gets hockey for me is, you know, those very generic, simple exercises that you do with every sport, they still work. They're still, you still need them. You know, I think getting stronger is getting stronger. You don't have to reinvent the wheel about that. But when you get into kind of the specifics of how that hip and pelvis and hamstring and adductors and quads work in that stride, that's where it starts getting important. And, you know, nobody really likes to say the word sport specific. But if you don't really have that lens of hockey, I think you're missing the boat a little bit. I think if you're not training these guys differently for their sport, I really think you're doing them a disservice. And that just from my experiences of training some programs in the first 2 or 3 years that just weren't working that well in terms of, hey, we're getting stronger in the weight room, but we're not getting faster on the ice. And that's a problem, right? It's like, hey, I got some guys that incredibly strong guys that were squatting, 550 and doing some, 600-pound deadlift, but they weren't getting faster. And so why are we deadlifting 600 if we're not getting faster? So that really made me evaluate some things. So just very generically, it's a big shift in that way of programming. I feel like I'm just kind of waffling on here.
No, that's awesome. I got a question on some of the specifics though. So when you talk about doing things differently for hockey players just due to their sport, could you just kind of touch on like specifically what differences in programming, what programming differences you take with hockey compared to, let's say, volleyball or just any other sport? Is it exercise selection? Is it the loading parameters? Just could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, and the answer is all the above. Almost everything I do, like volleyball, we front squat, we back squat, we deadlift, we do a lot of single leg training. Hockey, same thing. I'm not a guy that's gone completely on the side of unilateral training, although I do more unilateral training now than I do bilateral. And it's just because a lot of these strength coach influences that I said, these 17 people, Mike Boyle, back in 2005 when I was a GA, I was reading Michael Boyle stuff and I was like, single leg, that was all auxiliary for me back then. If it was single leg training, it was all after your max effort squats, period. Not even sure I knew what max effort meant in 2005, to be honest. But, you look at that, I'm like, okay, so we're training single leg and it's always as an auxiliary, kind of an afterthought. Well, through all these years, the big thing now is how do I load single leg differently to make that fit the effort of the day. So, you got to credit guys like Mike Boyle and Cal Dietz, and he's got, Cal Dietz, Hatfield split squat. That's who I learned it from, so I'll credit him with that. But it's one of those things that now that I can load single leg in a max effort way, that's absolutely changed the way that I look at my programs and progress them from cycle to cycle, whether it's early off season into season, and how much I want to really focus on the single leg. So just quickly about that. But the thing that I look at most is almost everything changes in the lens of what I'm looking at this program, because vilify that quad dominance, right? But for hockey, that's a really important thing to be super strong in your quads. But when you think about that, you got to have considerations for the pelvis and how that's oriented in terms of groin health through the season. So when I write for throwers or volleyball, throwers was I got to snatch, clean, jerk, and squat, and I got to get as strong as I can at that and then learn how to peak it. Bench press for the shot putters, but everybody else doesn't really matter for the bench press for us personally. So it was like, I just have to get better at these lifts. Volleyball, I have to get better at these lifts so I can peak my power and feel good in season. But for hockey, it was, I have to write lifts that not only are we strong, but we've got to learn what the implications are of having a weak groin. The adductors are the hamstrings of hockey, right? So when you're having all these other sports, your hamstring is the main decelerator, but in hockey, it's your groin. It's the adductor magnus, right? So if I don't have that lens of what I'm writing for a program, again, what can you say about injury prevention is maybe not the right word, but maybe injury mitigation. If you don't look at it from a lens of how am I stabilizing the pelvis through the internal obliques down into the adductors, into the hamstrings and glutes, if you don't have that lens, I think you're really missing the boat a little bit for hockey. And so in my mind, that's how my programs for hockey are more sport specific than my other programming, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I have a follow-up question to that. So when you're talking about the groin and the adductors needing a little bit, maybe of a more greater training stimulus for the hockey players, how do you load that? Is it a lot of Copenhagen, like adductor isometrics? Is it maybe heavy lateral squats? Like what's your approach exercise selection wise to train that specifically?
Well, really, when you look at the skating stride, obviously we want to have that thought of, what are they getting on the ice? And then I really don't want to hit that too much more in the weight room. Like think about that bucket, filling buckets, right? I can't remember where I heard that, but I like that term of if we're filling these buckets on the ice, we don't need to fill those buckets in the weight room. So one of those areas is when you're skating, that adductor gets a lot of eccentric load. So in the weight room, not so much going to feel that same kind contraction for the adductors in the weight room. So for me, it's a lot of ISOs. Copenhagen's are actually really important. It's really easy to get on a Copenhagen and really think, this is kind of a side plank with some groin mixed in. It's really an important exercise. And being able to do a high level of tension and work on that Copenhagen for that groin, that's a main one. So to answer your question, it's a lot of isometrics and concentric training, really, because that just gives you the other side of what that muscle is getting on the ice. So it's things like that. It's, doing band abductions and adductions the correct way, instead of just kind of, if you have your outside foot on a band and just pulling away, it's more like, how do I push with my inside leg that's not on the band? I wish I could have a video right now to show you that. But how do you push the way that you would push on your stride to now train the glutes, glute med or what have you in the right way? It's not, you can't just arbitrarily pull that outside leg on a band. You actually have to push away so those muscles are getting the right contraction. Things like standing physio-ball groin squeeze, laying on your back, the 90-90 med ball squeeze. It's, one-arm kettlebell lateral lunge or a Cossack squat. Go Instagram Vernon Griffith.
Yeah.
He's got a ton of good stuff. And he's been super helpful with me in trying to, gain some mobility and training that groin. He's really good at that right now. And I don't think anybody, if your head's in the sand, you don't know, but I'm sure everybody knows of him by now. And it's really good stuff. He's been super helpful. So those exercises, and I gotta give a shout to Tim Kelly. All those guys at VHP are just incredible in what they're sharing. But really, that's where I'm coming from there. And from there, it's how do those little exercises fit in the whole programming of what you're writing, right? You got to find the right places to put them. And for me, it's either at the start of the workout as more of a warm up, I guess, prehab thought. Some are within the workout in terms of where do I want to put this ISO within the workout, and then some are at the end. So for me, it's just making sure that our groin is strong. Recent research has come out that says if that adductor is less than 80% of your adductors, you're going to get hurt. So that was a big aha moment for me, saying I don't train the groin enough. And so this has been a very recent, the last 3 or 4 months with me, realization of I've got to up my training for the groin, because I'm still growing with that. I'm still learning. If you guys haven't read Anthony Donskov's new book, I just finished it yesterday. It's a fantastic book in terms of hockey, but I think it can relate to a lot of different sports as well. But really,
it's on my Amazon list.
Well, a lot of that is almost like, my understanding of it is very infantile right now. I think a lot of that is I'm almost like regurgitating what I just read, but it makes sense in what I've been programming and kind of moving forward. But like I said, I'm not the expert on it yet, but really that's how I'd answer that question. There's just so much more to a hockey stride in terms of keeping your guys healthy and getting them actually better at their sport than just, saying, we feel pretty good about being stronger in a weight room. Like if volleyball, if I get stronger in a squat, pretty sure our vertical jump's going to go up. Have you guys not seen the same thing? Mm-hmm. Squat goes up, bounce goes up. That's what we used to say in basketball. Sean, right?
Oh yeah.
But for hockey, it's like, hey, if my squat goes up, it's not always that you don't always get better at your stride, but force is a very good thing, and strength is very good too. So that's a long way to answer that question. I apologize about that, but there's a lot to it, and I think that you got to realize those things with the groin. It's huge implications for health.
Yeah, I know. So I know, obviously, with your Olympic lifting background, you've always been a proponent of the high bar back squat, especially when you're training with your athletes. With that hockey athlete, you've changed your stance, or their stances on their squatting a good bit. I know we discussed it in that, but even on your deadlifts, you've been a pretty good proponent of like the sumo deadlift, max upper trap bar, stuff along those lines. How do you shift from one to the other? And then I guess when to bring, I know off season kind of can throw the kitchen sink at them, but like in season, do you favor one or the other?
Yeah, really good question. So for me, early off season is just kind of getting them moving well again, right? I think that's a good goal of everybody's off season, no matter what sport you're playing. But moving from there, it's kind of that second block of off season going into and getting ready for a hockey season is very much quad dominated. Okay. So in that regard, I think my job in terms of how I squat is how do we better load the quad? How do we get really strong in the quad? And how do we get better power from that quad and also glute? So for me, the high bar squat is just a way for me to be more quad loaded. Okay. The trap bar deadlift, the high bar back squat, the front squat, a cyclist squat, the rear foot elevated, the split squats, all of that stuff is more of a quad minded training. And so for me, a lot of that emphasis is into that quad. I think weighted single leg squats are huge. You know, we've been doing a lot of that these past couple of years. One of our guys loves the Zercher one leg squat. Some people don't like that lift.
That looks so weird when you posted that, but it was cool.
Yeah, no, he liked it. And that was him coming to me saying, hey, I really like it loading this way. Can I do it? I was like, absolutely you can. You know, most guys we didn't have the whole team doing Zerchers. We had, you know, 3/4 of the team having weight vests or chains and holding sandbags and kettlebells doing it. And he just said, hey, can I do my Zerchers today? I said, absolutely. Yeah. Cause you're going to do, you know, 115 pounds for 6 to 8 reps each leg. Absolutely. You can do that, you know? So it's a lot of that freedom, that autonomy for these guys to do that. You know, some people didn't like that, but I don't care. You know, they're not at Penn State hockey, and
yeah.
I don't mean to get into that whole thing. But, you know, because that's not important, right? The only thing that's important is what you do at your place, and it fits your program, and that's how we do it. But, you know, so moving towards season really needs to be more quad dominated for me. But I'm not saying that I neglect the hamstring and the glutes. Please don't hear that saying you neglect that, because obviously the glutes and the quads are really what propels you on the ice, you know. And really the adductors is what really decelerates you. So looking into that, once I get in, that's how I do my off season. Now, when I get into in season, that's when I kind of take a step back away from that quad. And now I'm more of a low bar, more hip dominated movement kind of person, because again, what buckets you want to fill. Like if they're in practices and games and they get a ton of quad, glute, and adductors, do I want to do that same thing in the weight room? So my max effort work, now we do max effort work in season on Tuesdays, you know, but that will be more of a hip dominated movement, just to kind of stay away from what they might be overusing on the ice. So again, to answer that, it's more quad dominated away from season. In season, it's more of a hip dominated thing, but we really don't go away from doing anything. You know, I really want to train these skills all year round. It's just what takes the emphasis, you know, which one do you really want to focus on? And that's where that, you know, sumo deadlift again for the groin. I just like that. I like the wide stance back squat. And you asked me why I did wide stance yesterday, and that was one of those things. The answer is because Monday we did dumbbell rear foot elevated for isos. You know, we did like 3 sets of 5 each leg on a 3-second iso each rep within French contrast, right? And so that was a big quad dominated thing. So then Wednesday, and we did a lot of groin as well. And then so Wednesday, I come back with a wide stance back squat because it does 2 things. From Monday, their quads and butt is really sore. So the wide stance back squat kind of helps that low back and groin get more work. Yeah. And it keeps them a little higher. So then we can overload the movement. So then it kind of fits that max effort day better than if I would have front squatted, because that just compounds what I just did from Monday. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really, so that's how I pick those exercises. It's just like, what's my emphasis? And then how do I complement those emphasis lifts with what I want to do to fit the program? It's kind of simple, you know. Yeah. I don't think we need to overthink it. It's just what makes sense for that cycle. You know, last cycle, you know, I'm in a triphasic phase right now. I'm in the isometric phase. And the last phase, what was it? It was here somewhere. So Monday, my eccentric stuff was dumbbell front foot elevated, rear foot elevated split squat for eccentrics.
Oh.
And Wednesday, the max effort day, was a quarter squat back squat from pins, so concentric only.
I love those.
And then Friday was a 1-leg squat for 3 sets of 8 on a 5-second eccentric every rep. So it kind of fits that. It kind of fits the Monday primer, Wednesday max effort, Friday volume.
Yeah.
I'm still in that for my isometric, but now for my Monday isometric, I just took the front foot elevated off. So now we're just rear foot elevated, foot on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then Wednesday, the max effort day went from quarter back squat from pins into a wide stance back squat.
Yeah.
You know, so it just
Gotcha.
kind of fit the progression for me and, you know, what makes sense for that couple weeks.
Yeah. I love the partial squats or the half squats from pins. I've done it with the basketball guys that I work with, and they don't like getting full depth a lot of times when they're squatting normally. So like it's good for them, and then they can load the bar up a lot more and they feel a lot stronger too. So yeah, I love that specific exercise. But going back to groin strength and groin health, do you have some sort of metric that you look for? Like maybe it's how long they can hold the Copenhagen for, and if they can hit a minute or minute and a half, and you feel like you have the confidence to say there's a lower chance of risk or of injury risk with these guys. Do you have some sort of metric or test them in some way with the groin strength?
Not yet.
No.
Nope. I just full transparency and just being honest. No, not yet. For me, when I program the Copenhagen, it's like, you know, hey, we're going to pair it with whatever we're pairing it with. It was a band hip. I paired it with band hip thrust from Monday. So Monday we did some band hip thrust. Then you go do your Copenhagen. And for me, it was just 3 sets, and each side was 8 breaths. Right. So for me, kind of in the past, having some of a PRI influence in how that, you know, the rib and the internal intercostals and crap, you know, it all goes together to help stabilize the pelvis. So just very simple. I don't like overthinking things. So just very simply, you know, we do it for breaths. So we focus on that rib down. You kind of have that PRI breath kind of thought going to kind of set them in the right position for the Copenhagen, instead of just arbitrarily sitting there with your back arched in maybe a little bit less of a good position. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's just 3 to 4 sets of anywhere from 6 to 10 breaths per side. Mm-hmm. I don't test it. I don't say, hey, we're going to try to hold this for a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Cause most of the time we lift before practice, and I would just feel a little bit weird if I'm doing a max out hold on a groin before practice. Yeah. Would the Nordboard groin bar help? Maybe. I just don't have one yet. So I'm looking into that. I don't know. You know, there's some tests that you can look at to make sure they have the right kind of mobility and things in terms of when that low back and hip goes out of place. But right now I haven't done much. It's just kind of a thing in my programming, and still need to get better on that side of how to actually track that and see what's actually working really well or not. Because right now it's all, hey, how did you feel? You know, like yesterday lift was a really big groin day, and we had a good hour and 20 minute, hour and 30 minute practice yesterday. So after practice, I'm just down in the locker room saying, hey, how'd you feel after that kind of lift going into that kind of practice? Most people said, hey, I felt really good. So now I know, okay, we didn't overdo it. So it's just me kind of collecting that subjective feedback now from the guys, and just saying, you know, what's working, what's not, what's too much, what's not. Because really, I want those guys feeling good on the ice. On really they're going to be sore and tired, and that's okay. But I want to know what they think about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Gotcha. We have a little bit of time left. I kind of want to take one step away from just training itself, because I know whenever you were talking about you got into the realm of hockey for the first time, it was brand new to you. What were some of the things that you had to push to the side, at least maybe from a philosophy standpoint, or maybe just from a personal standpoint, to acclimate yourself to that culture, if that question makes sense?
What I have to put aside to acclimate myself to that culture?
Maybe I could rephrase that. What were some of the things that you like, because you jumped into that culture and they had their culture, they're like what they needed to do. So you had to mold yourself to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what was that transition like? Let's just talk about that. Like, what was that transition like?
Yeah, I think it's almost the same transition that I had to do when I got into basketball from being a wrestler. You don't understand the culture. You don't understand their background. You don't understand the music they listen to. You don't understand that this guy grew up in a poor area, and a slice of pizza constituted a lot of food for that guy growing up. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of the same thing in hockey. It was okay. What's A, how do they carry themselves? B, how do they like to be coached? You have a feel for the room. One of the most important things about coaching is having a feel for the room. You know, and I talked to Coach Roos after I listened to the podcast you guys did, and we were talking about, you know, some things you guys talked about, and it was, you know, there can be some really smart strength coaches, but if you can't coach it or you don't have a feel for what the guys are liking and wanting and have a feel for that room, it doesn't matter, right? So that was the whole thing for me was, what do these guys respond to? What is training for them? And so when you look at maybe some different sports, I don't have a lot of experience with football, but I would just imagine what you see. Football is a very intense sport. You play football at a very high intensity in that mindset of it's intense all game, right? Mm-hmm. So in hockey, though, hockey's not really a crazy intense mindset. It's a more of a relaxed, let me read the game, let's see what's going on, kind of a react and feel to it, right? So if I would come in and scream and yell at these guys, maybe like I would mold myself if maybe I did work football or some other sport that needed that, not going to work. And it didn't work right away because the way that we took over for that coach, you know, that old strength coach was an NHL guy, pretty laid back, said, hey, you guys come in when you can. We can train all day. We're good, super laid back. That really wasn't where I was at the time. I said, you know, we're going to come in at this time. Workout's going to be no longer than an hour and 15 minutes, and we're going to go. But when we first came in, the way that, you know, Fitz and everybody wanted it, it was 12 strength coaches lining that turf, clapping their hands during a warm-up.
Yeah.
It didn't fly.
Yep.
It was not good. And
they hated it.
Yeah, they hated it. And I didn't like it either because that's not really me either. But, you know, in Fitz has me going things and that's fine. That's the world that they live in. And Fitz was like, you got to blow the whistle, then say go. And I was like, okay. It didn't work. It wasn't working. And so after a couple of weeks, you know, Fitz and I had a meeting and he's like, hey, I like what you're doing. Take it, run with it. And then as soon as all those guys left the room, I had a meeting with the guys. And my very first workout by myself with this team was, hey, you got to realize that that's not what it's going to be moving forward. Let's now get into learning each other and things. So it got a little bit better, got a lot better really quick. But really it's just a feel for the room, feel for the culture. What's the lingo? You know, it's not like I'm going to be fake. I'm going to be myself, but you find yourself saying cues a little bit different. You find yourself just saying a couple different words that they might resonate with them a little bit more. If you said some things to a volleyball team that they've never heard that word before that hockey uses all the time, it has no meaning. So for me, that's where that went. It was just, you know, what do the guys like? What's the culture? And how are they motivated from my coaching style? And so I'm still me. I still expect a high level of work, but enjoying what you do, being positive and having fun is really important in our hockey weight room. You know, it's not, we've got to blast the music and blow a whistle and yell at you for an hour and a half. That doesn't work because they're not enjoying what they're doing, because all these guys, they love training. And if you do something that they're not liking, they stop loving training. They stop working hard. So it's just really important in that way of having a feel for these guys. And, you know, what's the language and culture from your head coaches? Sorry, I'm kind of going off on tangents, but if you take over a new sport, you have to have a feel for all of that. You know, does the head coach want me to be how they are, or do they need me to be that hype guy? You know, yeah. I'm really happy and lucky that they didn't want that, because I didn't want that either. You know, I don't need to be a super hype guy, because we just don't have that on the ice. You know, our big thing is we look at you like a professional. You know, it's your job to get yourself ready. No bells and whistles and screaming and yelling is going to get you ready. So take it upon yourself. So that's the culture we're in. I hope that answered your question, but that's really what it was. I mean, I've absolutely molded my coaching style to them. You know, volleyball, I'm pretty much the same guy. It's just some things that I say and some things, how I do things are a little bit different, you know?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I second all of that, because I work with a couple different teams, basketball, volleyball, tennis, and there's a little bit of different culture with each team, and you just kind of got to mold yourself a little bit without being fake and talking to the athletes. But to wrap this thing up, Cam, appreciate you being on and having a discussion with us. is there anyone that you would recommend we reach out to next to try to get on this podcast with us?
Mike Chapman, Stanford.
Mikey.
His name's been brought up before.
I tell you what, Mike
Justin Hong.
He's Justin's a great one too. And Mike, he and I go way back here. We met here at Penn State, and it's so funny because Mike makes fun of me all the time because some things that he and I vehemently disagreed upon in terms of some things. I have absolutely come around and seen his point of view, and it's so funny because he makes fun of me for that. But Mike is one of the best coaches at shaping a culture. I really don't think you're going to find a better guy than Mike about coming in. And if you have a less than solid culture, he's going to get it. Mm-hmm. I've never seen anybody change a culture so well and effectively within 3 weeks. It's absolutely insane how good he is at that. And he also has some really good stuff on his movement. Here's another specific, you can say sports specific thing he's so good at with basketball is he not only develops his guys, but he gets them moving well on the court, and the movements he does in the weight room really translate well to that. So he's my guy. He's a good friend of mine. I talk to him every day, but I really think he can add a lot to this. He's a good dude to talk to.
Awesome. I'll be contacted soon. Thank you, Cam, so much for spending the time with us today.
Sure. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Had a blast, man. Appreciate you coming and doing this. And yeah.
Absolutely. If anybody ever wants to reach out, from this, if it gets anybody thinking about some questions or anything, just please reach out. I'm very laid back on that. Whoever it is, a volunteer to a head coach, whoever it is, if anybody out there listening wants to reach out, please do.
We'll throw your Instagram, Twitter, and all that stuff in the show notes and everything. So again, appreciate the time, brother. It's good to catch up.
Thanks, Cam.